blanks here, and what we've got is a series from 1973, and produced by BBC, and a fantastic series. So personally, I found the series, I discovered it actually through Scott. I think 2 months ago, Scott said to me, "You got to check this series out." My wife and I, we watched the series, and oh my God, it was, it really was amazing, is amazing. And that's the kickoff to this branded duo that we've got here with Scott and Dan's High Ontology. So Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you think this series is, so amazing?
Well, because I'm an authority on all things educational on television. I'm just kidding. In 5th and 6th grade, someone turned me on to Doctor Who, which is a BBC production. So I started watching PBS after school, and I felt like I was being rebellious because when you're a tween, you're trying to be as adult as possible, and PBS is the non-adult channel. So there were these things on PBS that astonished me, namely James Burke's BBC series. He did a series called The Day the Universe Changed, and he did another one called Connections, where he shows how the development of the steam engine led to postage stamps or something like this. He shows connections between things in history, and it's just so fun and so exciting. And I went to England when I was 10 years old, and I noticed that the TV stations in the hotel, they were teaching relativity by having the bowling ball on a rubber sheet with the grid drawn on it. And I was like, how come American television sucks so much? And why is it's either Sesame Street or like the firing line? And there's nothing really educational. There's no celebration of excitement. So in England, and I guess maybe in Europe also, the culture admires, they admire discovery. They think intellectual discovery is valuable intrinsically. And they think that reality possibly is actually interesting, and that the world around us that we've secreted with our technological know-how came to be in a certain way, and they're not all just jerks. I mean, eventually it becomes commodified, and it's a factory, and it's alienated labor, and it's very depressing. But once upon a time, these were people who had really bad models of what the world was like, and they were working against matter and trying to figure out what was going on. And they're heroes because they discarded their maps, and they were really interested in letting nature speak for itself instead of imposing what you're supposed to impose on it, which is what the people in the tribe say you ought to, namely Aristotle and the Bible. So to have a beginner's mind in nature is heroic. And of course, it's more fun when you approach any lover with an open mind without expectations. It's more exciting. And that's why we go to haunted houses and roller coasters. We want surprise. So these are heroes of discovery and surprise. And Jacob Bronowski is taking us from the development of the human being all the way to this morning, 6 a.m. He's going to cover the whole thing, but he's not covering everything. He's covering the creating and destroying of maps of nature. And we see along the way that as humans develop new maps of the real, of course, they're going to develop new maps of themselves and the ethical and the moral. So it turns out that metaphysics it's not really irrelevant to even, private, precious things like self-consciousness, self-concept, self-image. These are all tied up in our story of nature. And what do we have today as a story of nature? I don't know. It's atoms in the void, and mythology used to be more comforting, but now you hate mythology because it's aligned with, conservative Christianity. And it just seems to be not as exciting as it was in the old days when I guess there were frontiers. So this is the story of when there used to be frontiers. I guess there's still frontiers now because of dark energy. But this is the story of when there were lots of frontiers and people didn't know what the hell was going on. So they had to fiddle and probe, and they made amazing discoveries. And there's no person I could think of who's more equipped to talk about this, besides James Burke and David Attenborough, than Jacob Bronowski. Because this guy, he was a patented scientist, and he was a science historian. And he was also a poet. And his biggest book was a book on William Blake. And he was an actor. And you'll see that when he expresses himself, this is all improv. So this is like Jimi Hendrix at the Fillmore during 69, 70, which is the greatest improvisational guitar performance in history. So Bronowski is the Jimi Hendrix of education, and people don't know this because they see 73 and they think out of date. But actually, none of this
Mhm.
stuff is out of date. It's all up to date, and it's just so great to see someone like Hendrix tapping into the Tao and then channeling it in their expression, channeling it in their delivery. And Bronowski, oh, this is all improv. This is going to astonish you. The book came after the movie. So Jacob got up, he did all this stuff off the cuff in one take, and that was it. And then they wrote the book by transcribing his improv. Anyway,
Yeah.
maybe we're talking too much about behind the scenes stuff, but I have a video here of everyone's favorite educational speaker, David Attenborough, talking about Bronowski and what kind of character he was. And we can play that in a second. But Dan, what are your thoughts of Bronowski? The reason I'm excited about Bronowski is because I met an undergraduate student who seemed to be very curious about stuff. And I thought, well, I'll show her this video. She'll probably think it's old fashioned because he speaks slowly and carefully. And today, because marketing has ruined everything. Even the word revolution is a marketing term for detergent now. So when we see people speaking slowly and carefully, we think, oh, it's a parody of a smartass. But you see, Bronowski is actually, he's live channeling like Hendrix. So it's not an affectation. It's someone who's really tapping into the Tao and transmitting live. So I wanted to show this to someone and see if I could get a cynical young person's opinion on Bronowski and see if it, besides the fact that the content is the greatest content you'll ever hear, is the delivery okay? That's where we are today, right? Mm-hmm. How is the delivery? Was the performance good? And so she was in tears crying, and I realized, oh, I'm not the only one. Because every time I see a Bronowski episode, I actually do cry. Dan, what are your thoughts on Bronowski?
Wow, Scott, that's I mean, it's quite a contrast from speaking deliberate and slowly. I think you've got the deliberate part down, but that's a lot of information, and I can tell you've got some passion around this, and I do share that with you, maybe at least on a smaller scale, and that's only on appreciation. I've watched it now 3 times, I think, start to finish, and in the spirit of learning something, right? In the spirit of actually taking a piece of literature or a film like this and slowing things down to its core constituents, its learning fundamentals. This was something foundational that we do at Planksip, this publishing agency and media outlet that I run on a daily basis, right? So what I'm saying here about this particular film is that it's absolutely a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have the book to work beside the film, right? And as I'm doing that, I just learned from you that the entire idea of the kind of free-flowing flow state, this is kind of a buzzword right now, the flow state of this performance was then transcribed into a book. And I remember reading something, I think it was in the preface of the book, about how the likeness of the film and the book were intended to be as similar as possible. I think Jacob was saying that in the book. He says, I tried to make it as verbatim as the actual filming of the show. And like you said, Scott, that's an incredible feat to try and accomplish. We know how difficult it is in our day and age to just jump online as we're doing now. But imagine doing a production of this magnitude, right? One thing I think you left out, which I just to add and augment, buttress the concept and the heroic nature of someone like Charles Bronowski is first of all the opening. There's an opening done in the beginning of the book, a preface I think by Richard Dawkins, and he calls him a Renaissance man, like the of science, right? And that's so beautiful to hear. I think in this day and age, with the battle between science and religion, and it's such a weird dichotomy to push the two between each other. It's frustrating to almost hear impregnated in that conversation the lack of beauty inside science, where I think it's so severely understated that it's the heroic nature of people like Bronowski, maybe other subsequent science populators that followed. It's amazing to see that, and hats off. I just applaud, and I think our audience, on this show, this episode, this kickoff of the Scott and Dan High Ontology brand is all about that. And we're bringing the 13th series, we're bringing the 13 episodes, but after that, it's going to be, I don't know if we can top or even, what comes after Bronowski, but we're going to keep that kind of that thing moving forward. So I couldn't be happier to share that love with you, Scott.
Good. Yes, there's a love to scientific modeling, and there's a pleasure in coherency, clarity, and accuracy, like we talked about before. If you're able to stitch together all the components of your life and experience in a way that coheres, and then, like Han Solo leaving the Death Star before it blows up, you get outside, you see this whole thing from the outside, that can be intrinsically pleasurable. Having a consistent map of things that makes sense, that can be something worth working on. And in the old days, I think these things were more appealing. Like if you look at that old engraving, the Flammarion engraving, it's a picture of the world as a flat plane, and it looks like a dome, like a glass dome. And there's a man who has walked to the edge of the earth, where like the Truman Show, where the wall meets the ground, and he sticks his head past it, and he sees everything you always wanted to see: angels, demons, the four elements floating, and God, Yahweh, Jesus, and everyone out there. It's people liked it back in those days, where the planets corresponded to metals, and those corresponded to plants, and those corresponded to the days of the week, and the outer and the inner were identified, and the humors that made up the self were connected to elements and planets. And it was really an enchanting thing to feel like the machinations of nature and the internal machinations of your emotions, and also what God is thinking, that they're all reflecting in each other. Now we don't have that. Now our maps are separate, and they're inside of specialties, and this is the Renaissance man thing. People are sad that we can't put together all this massive information into something that makes us happy as that little man who would crawl to the edge of the Truman Show and peek outside and see God. So I guess we don't expect something personal like that to happen. We expect it to be alienating, full of void and atoms, and not self, not consciousness, not love. Anyway, but science is not the case that map building is alien. And just because everything is done mathematically doesn't mean that the interior of nature isn't magical. So it's true that our maps have to be mathematical in order for us to do good mapping. But like Stephen Hawking says, no matter how sophisticated your equations and formula, you'll never know what the fire is that's moving through the equations. What's the interiority of matter like? Very likely it's mental. So panpsychism is a crazy theory, easy to ridicule, but unfortunately all the other theories are even crazier. So it's likely that things really are weird and interesting inside, but that's different from science. This is the story of science. This is the story of understanding that nature is lawful, and how can we internalize those laws and predict them mathematically. So this is the story of digesting mystery into mathematics.
Right. No, I get that. I'm going to pause there for a minute and just go into a conceptual framework. Something came up in a conversation today of modernity and postmodernity. And Scott, you're always so gracious on helping clarify points and concepts for me, right? I mean, it just you help me along like a student-teacher relationship in many cases. So I'm going to throw out a heuristic that helps me remember modernity, and the heuristic that I use when I hear modernity is that severing society severing the past from the present, saying that's enough. We've had enough of all of this business of the past. Let's draw the line in the sand. Now, before I get you to comment, I'm going to say that the postmodernity understanding has to do with us saying, okay, what's next? Now, would that be a fair framework? I mean, without just superficially going into that.
Yeah, I guess that's okay. Modernity is what happened to human reflection in the arts once machine labor replaced human labor, and it created a distancing and the ability to abstract large swaths of nature in our understanding. So now Picasso was unraveling space to give you the space of experience when you walk around the object. And people were sticking knives through the canvas and just making completely white canvases. So now, what is that? That's moving away from figuration, and it's moving away from representation into a more sophisticated meta relationship to art. Now we're outside of it. So modernity is the replacement of human labor power with machine labor, and the effects on our perception resulting from that. And postmodernity is the replacement of human intellectual labor with machine intellectual labor. So now it's now belief systems are also objects that we can zoom out from and look at. History isn't real. There's no such thing as change. You can take snapshots, but those snapshots are all present in a hyperspace. So it's the change is supposed to be artificial, and everything is equal on the grocery shelf of worldviews, belief systems. So there's a flattening, an end of historicity and change, an end of hope, and a kind of passive consumption thing. You know, you like the Sphinx wearing sunglasses. That's a good postmodern image. Like, hey, who? You know, it's Tom Cruise sunglasses on the Egyptian Sphinx. Yeah, wow. So, and everything's the same, and so that's the postmodern condition is that reaction. So it's intellectual, and now it's even getting more exciting with the Google search engines knowing what you're thinking and filling out your thought for you, even as you type the first 3 letters in. This is going to change people, and it's going to change our relation to nature, and then we're going to have to express our radical subjectivity in some new weird art. So instead of you having a urinal or stabbing the canvas, who knows, right? We have these non-fungible tokens now. Maybe there'll be an anti-non-fungible token anarcho movement, which will express itself, through code. Maybe coding will be an act. Who knows what's going to happen? So the postmodern thing is everything's relative, and you can't. There's no transcendental framework for evaluation, because we know that all frameworks are relative, and so it's just kind of like kick back and just put sunglasses on the Sphinx and enjoy whatever is available.
Yeah, and I went to another place of association to say, how do you have a relationship with the information of the past, right? There was an affection and a love affair of those historical origins, and to me, what your explanation is telling me, or one of the derivatives from your explanation, is that we lose this ability to have an affectious relationship, a loving relationship with the past, with the ideals of the past, with our history. It seems to me that we lose something in that mechanization, and I think that's the biggest observation. At least from academia, if we're moving to a completely digitized space. Would that be fair to say?
That's right. It's like, remember in They Live, when Roddy Piper puts on the sunglasses, one of the things that he sees out there, a part of ideology, is to I guess reducing agency and radicality and criticality. You're rewarded for being a good worker and a consumer. You may require Prozac to do it, and you may have to use video games to fill in the emotional gaps, but you're rewarded for being a team player like that. So So yeah, there's going to be there's a new kind of cynicism and a new kind of disconnection that's going to be kicking in. There's going to be a new lack of affect, but our biology is still going to be there. So I wonder how alienation, how our disgust with alienation will express itself now, because every time we get more creative, capital gets more ingenious and finds a way to commodify that and sell it back to us. So I wonder what our new rebellion will be against the colonization of our souls in the Google way. How will that be resisted?
Yeah, I have a little bit more of an optimistic, approach on that, and I think that's the opportunity for the liberating tendency that we have as humans to free ourselves from those potential pitfalls, or at least as we're able to project into the future and move towards a common good, or an individual good, but a common good, right? And so I know it's an ideal, and that's another thing that's a part of the post-modernity condition, is that there doesn't seem to be a teleology of sorts, a goal-directed activity that we're actually moving towards, which I know there was one of the academics that I really liked. He was with the teaching company. He was an Aristotle scholar, Daniel N. Robinson. He seemed to think that was one of the vacuums or voids in a postmodern condition, was actually the lack of a teleology, goal direction, and even science at our best, like the goal direction, to say, okay, this is what we're going to focus on. It is a bit of a market. Has a bit of a market function as well in the.
Oh yeah, the market actually is the agent of history. Capital is the agent. So if you want to know who's the subject that's steering us, it's shareholders, the market, and what's selling. So there is a telos. There is something driving society. It's profit maximization. So in 100 years, America has conducted 100 wars. Everything is working for the favor of satisfying our duty to maximize profit for the shareholders. So it's not like there's nothing at work driving things. There is. So it's on the other hand, our feeling about it is, yeah, we're cynical. We feel less motivated, and I guess we're so used to thinking that every revolution is doomed to be digested and sold back as peace sign earrings and tie-dye T-shirts, that it's hard to get excited about anything now. It's hard to. I mean, is it possible? I mean, isn't the overmined Google machine on its way? I mean, with enough Prozac and enough wetware, maybe the Matrix. I mean, we won't be batteries. That was the worst part of the Matrix. But isn't something like perfect? What's the word? Absorption of the subject into actually, it may be that humans will become less agentive, and I think the Apple Watch will be the new real human. It'll be the new agent of history, and it'll use us to update its operating system and help it. But we'll be like mitochondria. We'll be working for iPhones, I think. iPhones will be the real people, and we'll be meat-based bank accounts that move with the iPhones in order that they can do their transaction and help increase capital. So I think the human may end up being an appendage of something like an iPhone in the future.
Yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to say is just a little preemptive warning to everybody. Where I'm at on Vancouver Island, it's really, really windy. So if I get yanked off of the internet wave or connection here, my apologies. I think we're safe. I think we're going to make it. But if all of a sudden I go incognito, that's the reason why. Now, I'm going to bring up one point. It should actually kind of pull this kind of introduction to a nice resting point. Scott, you're a bit of a Trekkie, are you not?
Well, I think most Americans are Trekkies. We didn't have a choice. I'm from Miami, and the local station played Star Trek every day for my whole life. I saw Star Trek not because I wanted to. It was like the shitty radio songs that you forced to listen to, and you hate them, but you had to listen to them, so now you love them. So I don't know if Star Trek's good or not. I just know that it was included in my baby food, and my nervous system is constructed out of Star Trek. So I don't have a really good perspective on it. And then once a year there was a Star Trek marathon. So I can't. It's like saying, is English a good language? And it's if it's the only one you speak.
Okay, so the reason why I bring that up is because I think it was on the Undiscovered Country, or there's one of the motion pictures where the Vulcans were just on the precipice of introducing themselves to the human race because of the shuttle they were launching into the atmosphere, right? And so it was that particular point where all of a sudden the older version of humanity, which would be our modernity, for example, would say, they look at the spaceship and say, man, this ship costs a lot. And it's really interesting and reassuring to know that the version of the future says, we don't really think of money is not really, we don't really think of things that way. We just build the stuff and fly it around the universe. You know what I mean? So obviously there's a massive paradigm shift from capital, at least if the direction ends in a Roddenberry direction.
That's right. Actually, there's a debate about this. There's old Star Trek and then Next Generation. And so these free market capitalist apologists say that if you're a man and you have sex and you eat meat, then of course you like the original Star Trek because they have more of a cowboy attitude. They're going around. Occasionally they'll follow the prime directive, but they're going around exploring and having fun, kicking ass and getting laid. And then in the Next Generation, they're all concerned about welfare and happiness. And is murder, is murder really okay? They're asking ethical questions, and that's kind of the gay, weak, we shouldn't follow that Star Trek. If you eat meat and you're a good Republican, listen to the Next Generation. So actually, there's a debate in the Star Trek community about whether incels should model themselves after the original series or the Next Generation.
Interesting. Okay, well, we're gonna take a breather there because I think we should get into a clip or two, right?
Yeah, yes.
I mean, this was about the Bronowski series, and let's play one and then just let that fill the consciousness with a pause. Let's play a clip, and you can be in charge of doing that, and
okay.
Yeah, then we'll just chat about it.
All right, here we go. Let's see if this works.
I don't think anybody knew what he looked like, actually, and indeed, maybe that's as well, because at first sight, he was a very short man, but he had burning eyes and burning conviction, and he talked with a burning passion and intensity which really absolutely gripped you. And I think it was probably him who decided that in order to bring some kind of coherence into science, which is after all one way of looking at the world, that he would look at it historically and saw how human beings and the human mind and human thought moved into more and more approaching towards the essentials of reality, working out the laws of nature. He saw that as a historical progress. But there was another thing about Bruno, and that is that not only was he a remarkable historian of science and practicing scientist, he was also a poet. He was an expert on Blake. He had written poetry himself. He had written literary criticism of Blake. And he had a feeling for language and a feeling for narrative. He told stories marvelously. And he was also an actor. I mean, he had a grasp of narrative timing, which was comparable to that of a really great actor. And if you're going to do this kind of program, you have to be able to repeat some particular introduction over and over again. And Bruno, together with Adrian Malone and Mick Jackson, who were the two directors, saw this thing as a series of dramatic statements. And Bruno wasn't one just to sit there and talk. Bruno would decide that he really had to do rather complicated movements in which he would suddenly, at one particular moment, come up against a statue of some kind, which would just at the moment in his speech that was relevant, and then he'd move on and maybe look in the mid-distance and then go on and do it. Now, he did that, would do that again and again. And above all, he was a great master of the hesitation. He had an ability to just pause and look up to the sort of mid-distance, as though he was desperately trying to find this one word out of the whole complexity of the English language, which is going to summarize what he really meant. And it was like forcing it out. And it had you on the edge of your seat. He had all those talents, but he also had a marvelous ability for visualization. There is a sequence in which he talks about crystals, dextro and levo-rotatory crystals. Now, I suppose if you started to think about that, you would start with a crystal, wouldn't you? Something that had that kind of symmetry, left-handed and right-handed. He started in Moorish tiles in, I think, the Alhambra. And he speaks of this and uses these wonderful tiles in an absolutely astonishing way, which really holds you. But having said all that, he was also capable of doing just one take. And one take that was straight off the cuff.
All right.
Wow. What I think was really sad just in learning about the man, because I actually didn't know about him at all, is that he died of a heart attack 1 year after the show. And his wife lived to the age of 92. And I think, man, like so many people that maybe, died, early or too early or earlier than they could have. What would he have done in a subsequent 20-year span? I mean, it's amazing. Amazing.
Yes, yeah. And how did his wife feel? Because, my dad recently died and my mom's miserable. And I mean, just if you spent your whole life with someone and they're gone, what fake filler things do you do to compensate for that emptiness? Well, maybe that's a bad attitude. Maybe you could use the pain to be super outgoing and make new friends or something like that. I don't know. Who knows? Pain has different effects on different people. But yeah, just like Jimi Hendrix, it was just a year after Fillmore that he died, and he had just contacted Miles Davis. He was finally going to do something weird and interesting with fusion, and then he just died. And all his girlfriend had to do was just rotate his face. 90 degrees would have been fine, just 90. But no, his face was up, so he inhaled his vomit and died. Thanks. That's a good girlfriend right there.
Yeah. Anyways, okay.
All right.
What do we do with that, Mr. Attenborough? Right.
Yeah, that's just a little bit about. It's an hour-long conversation, but I thought this was a good part because it gave you a little insight into. Actually, the best part was the subject matter. So the BBC had just did an art history documentary. What an easy job that is, right? You can almost just put the camera on a painting and have someone say something from Wikipedia, and you can make a whole series out of that. But someone, I can't remember who it was, someone said, why don't we make a history of science? And the answer was, haha, very funny, very funny. What are you going to put the camera on, right? This isn't St. John's University where we have every stage in history lined up on tables. We can go from thing to thing. Well, maybe they do it in a museum. So the problem with history of science is that you're talking about cognition. It's like a history of philosophy because, natural science was a branch of philosophy. It's just now that has its own, it's gained traction in the specialized vocabulary, and it has its own formalisms, and it has its own methods. But it's still philosophy. So how do you do a series on philosophy that's a video series? What are you going to do? Are you just going to have a picture of someone's face, like an old engraving, and then talking, babbling? I mean, where are they going to be? You're not going to have, maybe for Copernicus, you'll talk about planets or something like that. You'll have something visual. But how do you handle the visual problem when you do a documentary about the history of the abstract ideas?
Yeah, and so on, center stage in walks Bruno, and as Attenborough is saying, he is everything from his stage presence and to his artistic flair, his use and command of the nothingness between words, just was captivating to an audience. And we were talking about him earlier. We didn't even mention, he speaks God's language, which is a reference to mathematics, right? So, I mean, in a remarkable man. It's really interesting. I know one of the opening, I don't think we got a clip of this one, but one of the opening scenes is in La Jolla in California, with the moonlight on the little tiny, I don't know what kind of fish they were, but
that's the next
mating
clip
of that through them. Oh, it is the next clip. Well, then let's bring that clip on.
See, that's great. But let me say this. When I say that Bruno makes me cry, it's not because he looks like my grandfather or because he's sweet and friendly, but that's part of it. It's because he puts things. You know what it is? It's the right turn of phrase and using the right metaphor. He uses the right metaphor and the right turn of phrase, and he's there with you, holding your hand, and he's like Randy Rhoads. He has the arpeggio ready to go, and he's just going to go with it, and you think it can't get any better. But then he's stacking his explanation better and better, and you start weeping because you're so angry that you can't be that good. That's what it was. Like Nietzsche said, he said, "I don't want to believe in God because I can't stand not being Him." That's why I think I cry when I see Bruno speak, because I know I'll never be like that. And when I was a kid, I used to take acid and watch Hendrix play, and I realized this is a terrible idea, because what's more depressing than realizing you're never going to play like Hendrix when you're on acid. And then you try to do it while you're on acid, and then you really fail. Then you're like, oh my God, I might as well just kill myself. So I think that's the reason I weep when I see Bruno speak, is because he's such a great speaker. I think I'd rather hear him speak than any other human being speak, except maybe Rick Roderick and maybe Zizek. So Rick Roderick and Bruno, I think, are the greatest speakers in history. All right. Well,
Zizek, really, that's interesting.
Well, yeah, Zizek's a great speaker. I mean, he's also improvising. He's not reciting cliches because he's a scared idiot like Jordan Peterson and all those other guys. He's really on top of
and
this.
For another episode.
That's right.
Well, for another episode, right? Definitely. Maybe for the next series. That would be a good one. So let's jump into into that clip.
All right, so this is the intro clip. Here we go.
Every landscape in the world is full of these exact and beautiful adaptations by which an animal fits into its environment like one cogwheel into another. Millions of years of evolution have shaped the grunion to fit and sit exactly with the tides. But nature, that is evolution, has not fitted man to any specific environment. On the contrary, by comparison with the grunion, he has a rather crude survival kit. And yet, this is the paradox of the human condition, one that fits him to all environments. His imagination, his reason, his emotional subtlety and toughness make it possible for him not to accept the environment, but to change it. And that series of inventions by which man from age to age has remade his environment is a different kind of evolution, not biological, but cultural evolution. I call that brilliant sequence of cultural peaks the Ascent of Man.
The Ascent of Man, yeah. I like the imagery of the landscapes, so the peaks and valleys, right? And that cultural evolution. We know what the low points would be, right? The Shoah or, like the Holocaust and stuff like that. But the peaks, what are the peaks? And that's what makes I think proud to be a human. Really, I think this is what does it mean to be a human? Well, that's what we move towards, right? Celebrate those.
Yeah. That's right.
Anyways, that's a little bit sobering, I guess, or let's get it. Let's what was your take on that? I think it was so poetic because he puts it in the moonlight, and it's actually in the place where he lives, right? He lived in Jolla, right? In California. It's like what caught me was that that's right in his neighborhood. And there's like that kind of scientific reality and beauty is around us everywhere. It's just how do we have the ability to actually describe it and to see it? That's the question.
Yes. Yes. In the part just before that, he was talking about the grunion, it's the fish. And so it turns out that the mating cycle of the fish works with the moon. So when there's a full moon, then there's the high tide. So what does that mean? That's when the females dig their way backwards into the sand, and then the males come beside them and dance and then inseminate the eggs in the sand. And then they leave. And now what has DNA done? DNA has picked the right time to hatch, namely 15 days later, or I guess it's 15 days later, 30 days later, when the tide comes high again,
right.
Then the water's up. So he's talking about biological adaptation and fitting into the environment hand in glove, so that your survival is in a symbiotic, it's in a dependence relationship on the environment, and this well fitting in is what humans don't have. It's the fact that we don't have a good fitting in that has given us this other attribute of plasticity, that has given us all these other cognitive advantages. And this history that he's doing is the history of what an animal does when it, first of all, wants to survive, and it has a cognitive advantage. What it does is it tries to colonize space and time away from its body for survival advantage by making maps of reality and maps of nature so that it can predict things. And this is what mechanics and all the other sciences do, is they allow us to expect and anticipate change, because change is what gives us death and life. So certain primates, because they were ill-equipped, puny, and not fitted into their environment in a good way, we have this other ability, which is the ability to map, to extract the self, to map, and to model things at a distance, and to capture space and time as imaginary objects, and then construct emulations inside of it. This is the key idea. Humans are the animals that emulate, and our emulation is what allows us to anticipate and survive. And all the sciences are the effect of an anxious primate who's been given the mutations of weakness, fragility, and ill-fittingness, combined with this extra centimeter of cortex and the ability of us to emulate the things outside of us and make simulations, emulations, and then ultimately mechanize these and make them computable or mathematizable or calculable. You can calculate where the planets are going to be. You can calculate where the lion and the tiger is going to be. We're the calculating anxious primates.
We are the manifestation of the God that we actually project, basically. Is that fair enough to say?
Which God?
Well, I mean, the God that we create. I mean, I'm not invoking something outside of the creation of humanity as the God, as the entity that is everything that we can imagine, right? I guess we don't need to get into a God definition. That might be
I think you meant any particular God, but I was trying to understand what exactly you meant.
Well, I meant that. I mean, if I was going to say what the conception of the collective historical and future potential of humanity is, that is what is represented in the idea or the ideal of God, and then there's the mathematics that we use that speaks his language, and that allows us to communicate in a predictive sort of fashion, right? So I was just building on.
There's the God of the geometers and the clockmaker God. Yeah, I think that's a good God. And if I were to play either Warhammer or War Machine, there's one cult. It's a cult, and they worship the watchmaker God. I think it's lawful neutral or something. I think this is very interesting. And if you're a Mason, a Freemason, the big secret you learn in Freemasonry is that God is a geometer. And how do we know that? Because nature is mathematical. That's proof. So God does math and he does geometry, and nature expresses his engineering proclivities. So this is an attractive idea. And as soon as we see, this is an example of what Bruno's going to talk about. When we see that nature is mathematical, we suppose naturally that the cause must be a mathematician.
Yeah. All right. So do we have another clip loaded up there?
Yeah, here we go. This is going to be Dan's first commentary clip. Here we go.
Splitting and fusing the atom both derive conceptually from a discovery made in prehistory, that stone and all matter has a structure along which it can be split and put together in new arrangements.
Yeah. So where do I go with that small little tidbit? Right. It's just a very small clip. The reason why I chose that clip is because I almost felt the context of the splitting of atoms for me expanded over time, and this is just a personal experience understanding of what the splitting of atoms meant. Okay, so here's how I would frame that. When I was younger, I think we've all got this cultural image of a nuclear bomb and the devastation of what that would do. We've seen those images where the entire landscape gets whitewashed and blown out, and the people in a nuclear explosion are just turned to ash. Like we understand that. So, anyways, this is the context that I had on nuclear energy and our use of nuclear energy, right? So then over time, and I would imagine that there's people that have a similar understanding of what nuclear power was. Okay, now over time, I started to get more into philosophy, right, as you know, and we look at Democritus, for example, and how surprising it was to me at that time to learn about a pre-Socratic philosopher that described came up with the concept of the atom. That's where we derive the terminology from, is from Democritus, right? So there again is that knowledge is building, but it's building back on a past that, I mean, I never knew that, right? And so what was really interesting about this moment on watching Bruno and watching the Ascent of Man was that Bruno's actually taking that trajectory, and he's moving that even further back for me in terms of understanding and saying it actually was prior to even a concept of a single most reducible sort of smallest entity, which was described as the atom. It was actually it was a prehistory that was really the beginning of this lineage. And so that's really what I wanted to describe in that clip, is how, what happened with how my knowledge was augmented all the way back, and realizing, he's right, that is a prehistory in the way that Bruno has explained that actually has really informed, in the knowledge through to today. And I think that was quite beautifully done.
Yes. And, I would say that was my favorite idea. When I first saw the series, I was in a state of shock, of course, but still there was some memory. I had some memory with something, what happened? And then I came out of my fog and I was like, oh yeah, I remember. And the part I remembered most was this contrast I think it's the next episode. It was so great. And it's just one of the things where when you hear it, you're like, oh, all my life I felt that way and I never made it into an object. So he makes this distinction between sculpting and cutting. And it's like the greatest distinction anyone can make. And if you talk about the history of science, that's the moment of enlightenment. That's the moment of maturity. So it just occurred to me right now, this parallels the development of the human being. So when infants want something, they scream or speak, and they throw a tantrum, or they say something, they express, and they demand or command. And then God, which is mom or sometimes dad, will fetch the food and fetch the milk, change the diaper. So that's a magical relationship to the world. By magic, I mean desire with minimal expression realizes an effect. So the baby goes, and then food comes. So that's a magical relationship, and that is pretty close to sculpting, isn't it? When you have soft clay, you can, I mean, how many steps of mediation is it between having the desire to sculpt the banana, say, and then sculpting a banana? You just take the clay that you have, and it's like 5 seconds later. So clay is something, it's soft and pliable, and it's really fake. Clay is the worst representation of matter, isn't it? Because it seems like it'll accept any form, but actually it doesn't. If you zoom in close enough, you see it's all law. It's all imprisoned. But because the pieces are separate and you zoom far out, you think clay is like chintamani. Chintamani is this magical stone in Indian mythology. It's like a dream, like astral material, so that you can will something, and then this stone will become the thing that you want. It's like the tree that gives whatever fruit you desire. So clay is the most tricky and most bewitching and the evilest of all models of matter. And we love it. We use it all the time. What do you mean by matter? Especially when we do metaphysics. Matter form. What does matter mean? Oh, it's amorphous and it does whatever you like. It takes on the form of its container. It's just totally passive and receptive, man. It's matter. Well, that's clay, and the clay is a false prophet. It's not teaching you the inner nature of things. So in the beginning, man is stupid like the infant. He screams and cries, and he wants to make a cup, and he makes a cup like that. And he thinks, oh, well, look at that. Nature is very amenable to my desires. Then later on, he interacts with what? Wood and stone. Now you have matter, and it could still submit to our desire to analyze, because that's how we create. We create by analyzing. We create by cutting and recombining. And that's also how we understand. When you understand something, you don't grasp it as a blob. You divide it into plastic and round and cool and transparent and makes this sound. So understanding also works by cutting. We cut the world into concepts and we bring them back together again. And so there's two components to knowledge. There's the matter, which is the concepts, and then there's the way you put them back together again. That's what Kant's all about. Kant says that if you know the way you put them back together again, then you actually taught yourself physics automatically, because the natural world is the one that we do combine. So you have the baby screaming, and that's clay. But then man runs into wood, and he runs into stone, and he realizes that if he wants to be the master of nature, he can't cry anymore. He has to actually conform to the pre-existing structure in the material. So if you want to cut the wood, you can, but you have to cut it along with the grain. And Zhuangzi writes about this in Chinese philosophy, and I think the Taoists use this also, that the way to approach life is to not cut against the grain, but to move the knife between the ligaments and the bones. And they use butchery as the metaphor for good living. So the master of the force is never getting into problems. The master of the force is slicing and there's masters of butchery that in fact do this. They just go like this. I mean, their eyes are closed and they're swinging their arms and they're going right between everything that's hard, and they're cutting through everything that is soft, and the animal falls apart into its parts. So that was the next step in our scientific evolution, was realizing that I can cut the stone and I can cut the wood, but I have to submit to it. So my submission to natural necessity is my first step in maturity, and it gives me my first power over nature. So submission is the key to power.
Submission is a key to power, and it only happens after that that vulnerable state of childhood. Can I add that to the
that's a good point. Right, and then so the toddler, when toddlers don't get what they want, and I mean, well, Donald Trump and certain other toddlers have. But in general, toddlers are required to interact in an economic exchange way with the parent. So now if you're 3 years old, you don't say, feed me. You say, Mom, can I have Pop-Tarts for dinner tonight instead of something healthy? And she'll say yes if you clean your room and mow the lawn or whatever it is. So now it's a favor thing, and that's what religion is, right? Magic is telling God what to do with metaphor and analogy. Fraser talks about sympathetic magic, where it either belongs to the thing, like the voodoo doll has hair from your person you want to kill in it, and so there's a relation that way, or it's shaped like it. So magic works through just identity and association. But then religion works in exchange. Now you kill an animal and you give God the smoke. You sacrifice a bull or a dove to Yahweh, and now he'll make sure that your babies don't die when they're born this time. Now he'll make sure that the enemy tribes won't kick our ass in battle next time. So now religion is when the infant becomes a toddler. So now the humans want things that they don't know anything about, like rain, and political negotiation with enemy tribes, and these are mysterious, strange things. But you can ask Yahweh to intervene for you, but you have to ask and you have to do him a favor. So there seems to be an analogy between going from
and submit,
and right, and you submit. You say yes, yes, Alpha, I'll clean your bathroom if you let me have more bananas this week. So something like that. So there's a movement from infantile magic to what is it? What's the word? Something like negotiation, compromise. There's a move from magic to compromise, and it seems that this is similar. This movement from clay to stone, it seems to be a similar movement. Now I've talked about it way too long. It's no longer interesting. How about the next clip?
Okay, perfect. Yes.
All right, here we go.
The evolution of the brain, of the hand, of the eyes, of the feet, the whole human frame makes a mosaic of special gifts. Man is not the most majestic of the creatures. Long before the mammals even, the dinosaurs were far more splendid. But he has what no other animal possesses, a jigsaw of faculties which alone, over 3,000 million years of life, make him creative. Every animal leaves traces of what it was. Man alone leaves traces of what he created.
Very nice.
Yeah. Okay, so let's think about the choice of actually picking that clip. So I picked the clip, and that man and creation, that's the differentiator there. And he creates, right? And so I really like that. But the point is I was going to say, why did I just not stop the clip there? Why did I pan it out to the point where I'm actually looking at the dinosaur? So and the entire sort of length of and the focus on the skull. The reason why I did that, because I actually remember pausing and thinking, should I clip it after he says his name, or should I take it all the way out? And I took it all the way out for this reason, that we've actually, in a weird, perverse but educational way, created that structure to present itself the way we have in the form of the paleontology and the display of the animal bones, right? Like, that is a fair representation of the way the animal and the way the dinosaur was constructed. But there's an element of creativity to make it manifest like that and present itself to us in, so far into the future, right? In part of our reality. So that's the reason why I did that.
That's a very good point. It just occurred to me that there's two ways of being immortal, right? You have kids, and you you mummify your body and turn your house into a museum and have people walk through it. Or like Timothy Leary, you turn your house into an online museum and you shoot your ashes into this space station. And then there's this other way of being immortal, which is making a great book, making a great painting, or doing something like this to be remembered. And I think this is what's going on with this Ancestry.com stuff and this 23andMe thing, It's like people realize, damn it, with my work and my life, I really won't be able to make the great novel or the great painting. But maybe I'm related to Kubla Khan or something, and so I'll send my DNA in, and look, I share some sequences with Catherine the Great, honey. What do you think about that? Look, we're great after all. So I guess there's a second way. There's a backup plan. So if you're not a creating human, you could always preserve your bones and show your family tree.
Yeah, I do. I appreciate that. There's a bit of a narcissistic kind of observation in that standpoint. But let me maybe fill in a different potential sort of thing. So let's imagine 50,000 years into the future, something catastrophic happens to humanity in a relatively short period of time. I don't know, call it like climate change, maybe. I don't know, just something out of the blue, right? So let's say there's another extinction, and some sort of future race or something with the cognitive ability to look back at civilizations. They come and they say, oh well, look at this. We found these dinosaur bones here. They're in this pile of oil. And preserved in this particular way. Isn't this really neat? And look at the way it's laying and all this sort of stuff. And and they're like, yeah, that's a good idea. That's very interesting. And then somebody else points out a big pile of bones that are all sitting structured just like the one we saw in this movie, and go, how the fuck did that happen? So this is my point: is that even the act of creating, even happens in science, which. It just the subtle act of arrangement is something that just doesn't happen in nature, right? No one can put those.
Yeah, there's the ex nihilo creating of the artist, supposedly coming from the void, and then there's the creating of the scientist, which is you're creating in a way where you're erasing your footsteps, like Danny at the end of The Shining. And you're trying to get reality as it was before your intervention. That's why these archaeologists are taking billions of photographs and dusting things bit by bit to make sure they preserve the relationships. So that's what science is. The science is just trying to find the way things are actually related. So Galileo is actually timing the movement of the balls, as opposed to the fairy tales that we inherited, which are very reasonable fairy tales. That's why they existed in the first place. Of course, objects seek the Earth. They love it. What's the matter with you? Of course, the moon and the sun and all the planets rotate around the Earth. I mean, can you not see? So there's another artist, the artist of conquering sensation with reason. Scientists are artists that conquer the evidence of the senses with necessary inference from discoveries that through inference lead to the surprising discoveries.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect framing, Scott. I would also add, because I've told you before, I kind of return to Plato all the time. So if it is an imitation, what we're doing, and I could see that this representation of a dinosaur reconstruction is an imitation, obviously, right? So we're trying in a scientific way. We actually have a higher degree of replication, right? It's the variation from the original is more authentic. It's closer to the right, as opposed to some distinct metaphor. This is as close as possible. That's where science is just like right at the forefront of that interpretive and creative exercise, is what I would say.
And what you just said reminded me of something else. This impulse to create. This is Marx's anthropology. Marx says that man is like homo creato. We're always secreting form into nature. Once we learn its secrets, we can cut it and reshape it into a shovel, an inclined plane, a pulley, a bed. So humanity is the one that fights against recalcitrant nature in order to inject use value into it. And Marx's other great point is that we've actually secreted the world that we live in. Even nature preserves are part of our overall civil engineering projects. So there's no such thing as the natural. Everything is mowed and manicured. So we secrete this world around us, and then we raise new human beings inside of it. So now the humans that are being raised inside geometries and air conditionings and school systems, and then we have primates that have naturalized their relationships to each other, so everything is supposed to be like it is, and they inherit the normalcy of their bizarre culture. The normalcy of slavery, for example, the normalcy of genocide. Everything's normal and natural because that's what it is. So this is Marx's other great point: is that Homo creato makes environments that make human beings that think. So you're constructing people's thoughts and ideas. You're constructing their spirits. So humans make spirits by making matter.
And I think that's why our name and our brand of the high ontology is so suiting. I think it really fits with that assessment.
I agree.
And we have to, and then it's about transmitting that, and transmitting that culture into into the youngins, right, and future generations. So there lies the.
It's always good if you have a good education system and like truth, and you have good teachers. America, it's helpful. I mean, for the ruling parties to make sure that people aren't educated. So of course you underpay teachers. But in Northern Europe and other countries, teachers have very good wages, and they care about their quality of life, and so they do things that affect that. So it is possible to be intentional about your own cultural engineering. You don't have to leave it up to Exxon and these other people. I mean, you could do it yourself. But in America, we're so cynical, and we like a good con. That's what I love about this Trump situation. Americans love a good con artist, and you'll let him screw you over just so you can watch him do his magic. So I kind of like that about Americans. I have a love-hate relationship with Americans because they love con artists, and I understand that fascination with the evil guy at the carnival, the Ray Bradbury character, like someone like Trump, except he's an ugly, fat one. I like to think of like skinny evil characters, but I can understand that willingness, like the suicidal willingness to let the con artist have his day and see what happens. It's very interesting.
So on a side note, does somebody come to mind if I say, who is your most nefarious or like favorite villain? Do you have someone that comes to mind? Evil, right? Evil person. You can't use Trump anymore. You're banned from using Trump anymore.
An ex-girlfriend. I'll need to think about that.
Okay, I'll let you know mine. It's that whole Hannibal Lecter guy. I think that is just freaky.
Are you serious? Right? He's the most charming villain of all time. You must be kidding me. Who wouldn't want to have dinner with Anthony Hopkins?
Well, I know I would, but he scares the shit out of me, though, right? Like, I mean, I would hate to be, knowing I'd hate to be on the receiving end of that dessert tray, right? I mean, it's just so.
I would.
There's one scene where he falls into the pig pan, right? And he's so evil that the pigs. Well, he's so evil that the pigs don't even touch him.
I didn't know that.
So it's something so magically sinister and dark. Or pure, whichever way you want to look at that. There's something so like a superpower almost of that walking death march that is tied to intellect that is just bone chilling for me. I mean, I that's why I think it's so attractive, as a villain.
All right. Well, no, I mean, I think he's a great person. He'd be one of the top people I would want to have dinner with in real life, because, I mean, eating animals and eating people, it's really not much of a difference. I mean, we're like 99% identical to fruit flies. I mean, come on. If you're eating mammals, I mean, yeah.
Okay. All right. Hey, we're not advocating to eat humans here. Just in case
don't eat humans. I'm just speculating, like Gene Simmons speculates on the inside of, I think it's Alive 2, where they write little letters to their fans, and he says he's interested in the taste of human flesh. It's a joke. It's all marketing, folks. It's all marketing. It's a joke. Don't worry about it. All right, you ready? Here's the next clip.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
The evolution of the brain. Yet, such differences are secondary by comparison with the overriding difference, which is that the athlete is an adult whose behavior is not driven by his immediate environment. In themselves, his actions make no practical sense at all. They are an exercise that is not directed to the present. The athlete's mind is fixed ahead of him, building up his skill, and he vaults in imagination into the future.
Does it get any better than that?
Track and field. Yeah.
So I picked that clip because of Bill Gates. He started a company called Microsoft. And in 1977, 8, or 9, Microsoft released Olympic Decathlon, which is one of the first games for the Apple series. And the pole vaulting event, I don't know if you're familiar with this game, but you had to use joystick buttons and keys at the same time to get your guys to do things. There was all 10 events from the decathlon were in there. But the pole vault was just insanity. You had to go like this to run. So each foot had to get a touch of the keys. So you're like, you're doing this for like 45 seconds to get your guy to run. And then he starts approaching, and then you hit one key, and then his pole begins to dip down. You have to hit it the right spot because the pole has to go into the pit. And then once that happens, you hit another key to make him do a handstand. But you can only make him do a handstand at like 80 degrees. Otherwise, he'll fall back. And if you do it too late, then the pole hits the other pole off, and then you fail the event. So that was the real reason I picked this pole vaulting thing. But but coincidentally, it mentions this important point that humans do strange things that other animals don't do. Other animals eat, sleep, mate, and defend. And occasionally they get bored and sniff around. But humans do things that have nothing to do with immediate survival, like pole vaulting. But then you'll say, well, actually, if he pole vaults, then he looks good and he'll get laid more, because if you're a track star, then you date more girls and you have better kids. Well, I guess that's true. But in the immediate act, the act of pole vaulting is it's abnormal. It's something animals don't do, and it has the stamp of humanity. And I like there's a mindfulness aspect of pole vaulting here that he's talking about, and that's the human effort. It's all the strands of human effort, like all the parts of the keyboard action, are all moving towards this one point. And that's the point of springing off the pole like a bow and arrow and flying over the top. And in a sense, you're already there. And all you're doing is you're saying, come on, boys, to your body cells to get you to the place you're already at. You're pulling them towards you. So this is something other animals, I suppose, maybe they do something like that. They have endpoints in mind. But here we're gathering many, many strands into a single, very difficult endpoint. So I think the pole vaulting moment is a great example of something. I mean, it's just as good as like the final flourish on a sculpture or some great act of engineering when you finally get the what are those things called? What are those little helicopters called that people use now? Drones. Like
drones.
You can see this Indian engineer make the drone for the first time, and it's a climactic moment. So I think the pole vaulting is a great climactic moment example for that type of human consciousness.
I thought you were going to say Nobel Prize. It was like fill in the blank, and my mind put in Nobel Prize, like when the scientist wins the the Nobel Prize as the highlight, right? You know,
well, that makes sense.
It's just like well, standing on the stage as the Olympian, right? I mean, the Olympian, the training, you want to, you know, I mean, part of it is that visualization of victory, but the other part is visualizing with your body on how to actually be at every slice in time, how to actually position yourself, and through, you know, practice and your peers and your coaches and, you know, the tradition of this, they're able to emulate that, right? And so it's a wonderful tradition, and it's a wonderful, sport and competition in this spirit is interesting and remarkable and quite beautiful to see that we can do this. Yeah. So, you know, like humans have a tendency to take things to their novel extremes. So if in the spirit of competition, well, look where that's manifest over the last, 2 millennia, right? And so, you know, I'm not saying it all derived from the Greek Olympics, but, you know, in part, right? I mean, we got the idea somewhere, not entirely from, you know, competition for, like you said, to compete for women, right? I mean, that's I think more rooted in something less cultural. It's more rooted in biology. And look at the difference between those two competition points. A competition that's rooted in something creative. And I agree with you, Scott. It's not like that creative exercise is entirely directed towards sexual selection. This is ridiculous. It can't be the entire fundamental underlying driver, or at least in the way I'm kind of framing that, you know?
Yep. All right. I think this is the last clip. Let me see here. You ready?
Yep.
I think that the power that we see expressed here for the first time is the power of the forward-looking imagination. In these paintings, the hunter was made familiar with dangers which he knew he had to face, but to which he had not yet come. When the hunters were brought here into the secret dark, and the light was suddenly flashed on the pictures, he saw the bison as he would have to face him. He saw the running deer. He saw the turning boar. The moment of fear was made present to him. His spear arm flexed with an experience which he would have and which he needed not to be afraid of. We also look here through the telescope of the imagination. The imagination is a telescope in time. We are looking back at the experiences of the past. The men who made these paintings, the men who were present, looked through that telescope forward. They looked along the ascent of man, because what we call cultural evolution is essentially a constant growing and widening of the human imagination. The men who made the weapons and the men who made the paintings were doing the same thing, anticipating a future as only man can do, inferring what is to come from what is here. All over these caves, the print of the hand says that. This is my mark. This is man.
And it just doesn't get any better than that. He went all the way to the caves in France. He was there. That's the first artifact, the first known artifact. And humans were already they're strangely self-conscious and reflective and like ego stamping selves. You're not just peeing to establish ownership. You're peeing to show your personality. And those people were putting their hands up there not to make, it wasn't a stipple sponge that they were using to fill anything in. They were putting their hands up there, I imagine, because it was their hands. They were making a hand montage. So that was ego. Anyway,
Yeah.
what I like about this part is when I try whenever possible to explain everything through evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, whenever possible. So if anyone talks about anything about philosophy or consciousness or anything, in the end, I'm always going to try to find a good reason. So that's how he begins this section. He says, everyone understands why humans would invent a pebble, a flint, a spear, a knife. Everyone understands that type of artifactual action, that type of creative action. But what about this other stuff? This apparently useless, wasteful, surplus creative output. Paintings. What is this for? Well, in this case, it was entirely utility based. The purpose of making these paintings was to create like a virtual reality simulation so that the hunter could practice. So it was just like the holodeck. Oh, that's good. That cave functioned as a holodeck for early humans. They projected the scary incidents. They would bring the children in there blindfolded. They take the blindfold off, and then they put the torch suddenly up. Remember, these caves were completely black. So imagine being a child in a complete darkness, and then you see a scary monster face suddenly flash at you because someone puts the torch by the animal. Well, that's going to be terrifying, but good. If repetition creates desensitization, and eventually the child will be able to not panic and have his wits about him and be ready to plunge in the spear. So even art has a gritty, swampy bio story behind it. So I like this way of ending it like that.
So okay, I want to get that one point. Would you say, because I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. If you say, if as that child comes into that cave, because they're in a way they're transferring information to younger people. There's a teaching aspect going on. Here, young hunter, here's what lies in store for you, right? And just in the act of it being in a remote, hard to find location in pure darkness, right? That heartbeat, that anticipation, that fear function is present everywhere in that situation. But we're here. We're going to show you. We're going to teach you. That starts to calm, the nerves start to calm, and then the ability for the learning function starts to graph onto the young hunter in a safe environment. Would that be a fair point?
Yep. You're reproducing.
So it's functional to.
You're reproducing a future problem in a safe simulation mode. It's like boot camp, or I guess it's like anything. It's like practice. It's a kind of practice. You repeat the thing in a zero threat environment, and practice falls under that because in your bedroom is zero threat, and then being on stage is threat. You're practicing in a zero threat environment so that you can do well in a threat environment, because sympathetic nervous response kills, smooth delivery and creative action and stuff like this. Coordination. If you're trembling so much, you won't be able to throw the spear well. So they're using their own visual environment as a way to make fake threats so they can practice.
Yeah, exactly. It's really quite amazing. So what a discovery to the Lascaux caves. And so my only critique, and I think this is a fair critique, I don't know, how do you offer a critique that doesn't degrade the value at all? My only wish here on this particular scene was that if there was a way to do it with a camera that was like a handheld like fire, so you could get the flickering of the light, because I think there's an element to that actually, with our mechanized post-modernity, our mechanized post-modernity world, we have these alien-like lights. Right, they're just like this constant stream of sunlight that's not even colored the same. Right, it's like the lights that they would have brought with them on their back to set up the scene. Right, and so there's it's so artificial. But if that experience, if I wanted to experience that cave experience as artistic and as real as possible, I'd want to have like a torch or like, a little fire pit illuminating the space. You know what I'm saying? So that was my one thing. I wish that scene had like the flickering light to even evoke some movement into the images, because I think they don't have the benefit of seeing IMAX and all the visual stuff that we have. We are culturally looking at it and so impressed about our own history. So there's an ego play in there too. This is our history. Oh, that's what it's like. And 30,000 years ago, humanity actually had something very similar to the way we are now. Isn't that amazing? This kind of humanity, ego, all this kind of stuff. When I look at that, I think, fuck, you could have that exact situation without there's an element of ego of us even looking back on it. And, when you look at the time period and that actual experience, I think that and I'm just repeating myself here a little bit, but they don't have the benefit of looking to our technology, seeing the IMAX, seeing all the artificial visual gluttony of technology that bombards our nervous system, right? They don't have that. So this would be like the most incredible visual experience that they had ever seen in their life, right? Like that holodeck. That'd be like, are you kidding me? That would be the most incredible thing they had ever seen.
That's right. And think about this. It has a dreamlike quality. So you're in a place that's black.
Yeah.
And then suddenly there's an image, but the image isn't the furniture of physical reality moving towards you in real 3 space. It's a dreamlike fake image. It's like a movie, and all sorts of people write about the analogy between the cinematic experience and the dream experience. Because in a dream, can't your first person perspective switch from shot to shot just like in a film? Because in reality, no one could have that experience of a film. You're not close up 1 second and looking at a window in a different city the next second. But in the movie, it happens. In dream, it happens. We're like, I'm still the same subject. This is all normal. So there's a dream element to the child being in blackness, not knowing what's happening, and then seeing the devil gigantically. And you saw how they made the loins of the lion and the rib cage fit the actual relief of the stone. So it may have looked for a little while like a real 3D action.
Yeah, no, and I think that's amazing. And then what are the other aspects of it? Okay, so I'll leave olfactory out of it. There's no point that bring in smell. I can't think it would be anything that, musty. I don't know, whatever. It's I don't know if that really adds to the experience. But sound, for example. Okay, so I'll talk about 2 things. I don't know if they would have replicated anything like a drum beat or a pounding or anything like that. But in a closed space like that, even the dragging of your feet would do something, right? Like the shuffling and the sound and stuff like this. This would add, something to the ambiance that we can't quite realize. And then the other aspect is that, the nature of the language. So we can intellectualize it. We can use our language, in our current language to understand and rationalize and intellectualize this. But what was the extent of the language 30,000 years ago? So a series of grunts, and I don't know. I'm totally ignorant on that because I don't know. What would that soundtrack be? I don't know. What's your guess on it? Like how would they have communicated? Language wise back then. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, we could speculate about whether it included sound effects or not. But the point for Bruno is, so we're emulators, and even in our spare time, we'll emulate, and we're really good systematic emulators. So instead of just fantasizing about the thing, like many of us do, just fantasize about it, why don't you get serious about it and set up like a D&D campaign where you actually have miniatures there to work with, and you're kind of situating, and then maybe the other kids behind you, and you put the magic user in the back, and you put the dwarf in the front, and then the taller guy with the halberd would be second in position. So it's the imagination using the real world as a prop resource to really get a good emulation going and really practice well. And people were doing this from the beginning. They were actors and artists for the sake of better living, you know.
Well, it's interesting, and I wonder if this tribe, this community, actually had some sort of tribal fitness over other other tribes. That would be interesting. Not something we could get into, but these are all little things that kind of go through my mind. The last point that I wanted to make was this idea of the growing and the widening of the imagination, and so. I think we're kind of getting close to the end. If that was the last clip, and I think for me, I'm saying I think this would be kind of a nice, pulling together of the first episode. But I look at this growing and widening of the imagination, and I one word comes to mind: a consolation, and so this like consoling, right? So this consoling against the angst and the post-modernity condition. And so to know that we have as almost a naturalistic function in our cognition of growing and expanding in creativity, that as a naturalistic fundamental, I think is quite beautiful. And I think the core of what it means to be human. Captured by Bruno.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I agree. Well,
on that note, should we go and say hi to the?
Yeah, let's have a free for all with all the listeners.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, we were going to announce that people could come on the show, and so we will do that next time because we can't actually let people come on to this show. I see we're down to 3 now, so either they were so amazingly stimulated that they ran away screaming to tell people about the show, and or they had to go eat dinner or something. So, anyways, shall we? We'll wrap it up, and then we'll go and see everybody on the Meetup platform. Right?
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott.